Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. I know it's a very difficult topic to talk about, but I've always said, like, talking about it is not going to make it happen. I feel really passionate that if people know a few things about this whole experience, that'll be a better experience when they or their loved one needs end-of-life services. So thank you very much for coming, because I know that it's not easy. I also encourage you to look into other topics right now. There's a lot of topics about end-of-life care that people are particularly interested in, like death doulas and death cafes, green burials, voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, medical aid in dying. So I'm not an expert on all of that. I've had experience with it. I live in Massachusetts, so we don't have medical aid in dying in the state. But certainly if you are interested in any of that, there are lots of good ways to get that information. Primarily, I'm going to be talking about what I am experienced in, which is advanced medical decision-making, palliative care, and hospice. So I've been a longtime hospice nurse. I went to UMass for my undergraduate, and I went to UConn for my graduate. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse, and I've worked at a number of hospices in Massachusetts, and I taught at UMass Amherst and brought students into community settings, including hospices and hospice residences. And so what I've found is that people are in the middle of an emotional crises, and it's incredibly stressful. And we in hospice know a lot about the process and what happens and how the healthcare system works. So I'm really passionate about educating the public about this, because I want people to have a better experience. And I honestly think that if you know how it works, at least when you're in this very difficult place, you're going to be familiar with how it works. So what happened was, whenever I would teach new nurses or team members about the importance of closure or the importance of symptom management, I would refer to a story about Ray or Linda. And so this book that I wrote, When a Loved One is Dying, is a collection of stories of 17 people I've taken care of and the lessons that I learned from them. And after each story is some reflections on the family and some information that I think will help you if you're ever in that particular situation. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the book itself. It starts off with a chapter called "I Can't Believe This Is Happening," because unfortunately that's what happens. You know, a phone call or a doctor's appointment, and your life, changes very, very quickly. So it's a story about a woman by the name of Alice, who is a school teacher, and she has her husband and 3 children. And she was diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer and did not choose to get treatment because it was pretty advanced by the time it was diagnosed. And it's just the story of how she and her children dealt with it physically, emotionally, and then had hospice to help her. I just want to tell you that nobody in my entire long career reminds me more of my mother than Alice. And whenever I would go there, whenever I see anybody, I ask, is there anything I can do for you while I'm here or before I go? And Alice would always give me a chore to do. She would ask me to put sheets on her bed. She would ask me to, do whatever. And she also would have a jar of butterscotch candy on the table at the door. And whenever I would leave, she would say, have a butterscotch, it'll make you happy. So please have a butterscotch in honor of Alice and my mother. The second chapter is about Dottie. She was a person I took care of in our home care palliative care program. And so very few people understand, in my experience, what palliative care is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to read a little bit about Dottie's chapter. And then the third chapter is a chapter about my mother. My mom lived to be 96. And by the way, the book is dedicated to my mother and father. But my mother, the title is Good Days and Bad Days, because most people that are well into their 80s, 90s, and even hundreds have good days and bad days. So I think part of the job, or part of what is helpful, is to try to think about what makes a good day and try to have more good days if you can. And I think palliative care helps with that. And then the next chapters are about symptoms, because my experience is that most diseases, when they become either serious or at the end of life, do cause symptoms. And so there's chapters that talk about pain management and difficulty breathing, constipation, sleeplessness, things like that. And then the final chapters talk about the emotional and spiritual worries that people experience, and and how hard it is to say goodbye. So they're all stories of people, and I'm hoping that because it's in the storytelling format, that people can relate to it a little bit. But I will tell you that they're very realistic stories, so they can be hard to read, especially if you're in the thick of it. So I encourage you to just read only a few chapters at a time, and just to know that it can be hard to read some of the chapters, because it's sad, as end of life is. So I'm going to start by reading a little bit from my mom's chapter, and it's not specifically about good days and bad days. It's about advanced medical decision making. My mother's name was Helen, and she was a nurse, and she worked for 20 years taking care of people at a state hospital, people that had disabilities. So she was pretty amazing, and she was clearly the matriarch. My dad had died much earlier, so she had a lot of time after he had died. One day, my mother asked all of her children to come over for a meeting. She is neatly dressed in her pink turtleneck and soft paisley pants with jewelry and shoes to match. She sits in her favorite accent chair in her large living room while my brothers and sisters settle into various seats around the room and on the floor. After a few minutes of the usual joking and bantering among my siblings, my mother presides over the family gathering like the matriarch she is. Mom looks down at her hands, rubs the back of them, and then folds them in her lap and begins. I've asked you all to come over so I can tell you about a decision I've made. I've decided to sign a DNR, or do not resuscitate form. She looks around the room at everyone and continues. I've lived a full life and I don't want to prolong it unnecessarily. Besides, the chances of my surviving resuscitation at my age and with my medical condition are almost nil. I don't want to go through what your father went through in the end, and I don't want any of you to have to go through that either. Dad had had a stroke 2 years prior and endured many medical treatments, procedures, complications, and hospitalizations. He was not very happy. This had a big impact on my mother. She had a front row seat to the change in my father's character and his will to live. Now she wants some control over her own. I can move around, right? Yeah. Oh. So my dad died in an intensive care unit after they took off a respirator, and he died a couple of days after that. And it was early on, so it was 1985. My mom died in 2015, so as you can tell, it was quite a few years later. So things had changed quite a bit. Medicare started paying for hospice in 1981 or 2, so a lot had happened during that time. But still, what I like to tell people is about that is advanced medical decision making. Everybody 18 and older should have a healthcare proxy. So everybody should assign someone to make medical decisions if you can't make them self. It's really, really important. I just read yesterday that this is the 50th anniversary of Karen Quinlan. Remember that? So usually when there's a problem or there's a difference of opinion, it's usually a partner and a parent have different opinions about what should happen. And it's just really important to choose somebody or even two people to make decisions for you if you're in the position of not being able to make them yourself. It's hard to get people that are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s to have healthcare proxies, but that's usually when those big ethical situations come up. And there's a really good website that helps if you would like to look at it. It's called the Conversation Project. And on my website, it's maureengroden.com. There's references, and the Conversation Project is on that. They have videos that are very helpful. Actually, some of the videos are very comical, who you don't want as a healthcare proxy. But people at the end of life in the last several days are not fully awake. And so the health system turns to the healthcare proxy to make decisions. There's a chapter in my book called From Discord to Harmony, and it's two sisters taking care of their mom who lives in a nursing home, and they are on very different pages in terms of what to do. So we're used to that, and I can't tell you how important it is to actually assign somebody that you feel strongly will carry out your wishes. So it's not an honorary degree. You are really bestowing on someone the decision making. So you need to talk to somebody. Need to talk to people about what you're deciding. My sister, not my sister Ellie, here, but my other sister had back surgery, and on her way to the hospital called me up to ask if I would be her healthcare proxy. And like, but what do you, what would you want? I mean, you can't, you need to have a conversation with your provider. And by provider, I mean doctor, nurse practitioner, or PA, and also your family, especially the healthcare proxy. And a copy of it should be with your provider and with your family and on you, or at least on your refrigerator or someplace accessible. So that's one part. And there are a lot of other things. There are 5 wishes, there is legal guardianship, there's trust. Those are mostly in the sort of wheelhouse of attorneys. The healthcare system cares about 2 things, healthcare proxy, and then what procedures should they do in an emergency situation. So for that, it's in the state of Maine, there's a 5-part forms. It has to do with organ donation, it has to do with healthcare proxy, and then the last page is the one that has about resuscitation. So here's the thing, every state is different. And so it's important that you have the form, including the healthcare proxy, in the state where you live. If you're someone who travels to a state and you're gone for 4-6 months of a year, you probably should have the form in that particular state if you feel strongly about certain procedures or whatever, because they would probably honor the healthcare proxy and either MOLST or POLST form, but there's no guarantee that that would be the case, especially if someone in your family feels differently about it. Usually if everyone's on the same page, it won't be a problem. If someone's not on the same page, that's really when the problems exist. So healthcare proxy, you don't need to have a lawyer, you don't have to have a doctor, you just have to sign a healthcare person to make decisions for you, and it has to be witnessed by 2 people, and the witnesses can't be the healthcare proxies. And then the advanced medical decision making, it's different by state, and you're basically saying, do you want resuscitation? Do you want a respirator? Sometimes feeding tube, dialysis, things like that. Massachusetts, where I'm from, has a MOLST form that's very focused on procedures, but April of next year, they're going to a PULSE form. It'll be across state lines, and it'll be an e-registry, so all the paramedics will be able to have easy access to if there's a PULSE on file. And it's going to say, do you want full treatment? Do you want modified treatment? Or do you want comfort measures only? So it's not procedure oriented. So, familiarize yourself with, the forms. Definitely have a healthcare proxy. The people that need the advanced medical decision making are the people that probably have a serious illness. And by a serious illness, I usually mean like an organ disease, brain, heart, lung, liver, kidney, colon. And if it's at a point where you just, benefits and burdens, is this going to hurt me or is this going to help me? When you're at the point where you're trying to decide what to have done, maybe you're going to the hospital back and forth a lot, or hospital rehab home a lot, you might want to have a form that says, this is what I want or this is what I don't want. And, but you don't have to have it, but it's helpful to have it if you feel strongly about it. So does anybody have any questions about that? Yeah.
Excuse me. Once you fill the form out and have it signed, then what do you do with it?
Well, the healthcare proxy you can just do yourself, give it a copy to your provider, and make sure your healthcare proxy has a copy. The advanced medical, procedures, that actually is a medical order, so that has to be signed by a provider. So that is a conversation that you would have with your provider. In fact, Medicare started paying a couple of years ago an extra code that providers can put on a regular office visit, where they get extra money to incentivize having these kind of conversations, because frankly they weren't having the conversations. So, but that is a conversation. You don't have to decide on your own that I want this or that. I mean, my mother had decided that and then went ahead and filled out the form with her doctor. But the form that has to do with procedures, resuscitation and all that, that has to be signed by a provider. And that's usually a discussion with your provider, because your situation might be very unique. Your heart disease or lung disease, and they'd have a conversation about what might be in your best interest and what might not be. So unless you feel strongly about it, my sister feels very, very strongly, not Ellie, my sister Ellie, that's my brother Christopher, they're both Mainers. My other sister, who's a palliative care doctor, feels very strongly that she does not ever want a feeding tube. And she's, younger than I am, but this is just something she feels very strongly about. So if you feel strongly about it, but that has to be signed by a provider. And then a copy goes with your provider's office. You keep a copy, and your healthcare proxy should have a copy. And there's a lot of fancy things now where, I'm the healthcare proxy for my sister who's 83, who has advanced dementia. She's now on hospice. And I have all of her documents on my phone. So I have her healthcare proxy form. I have the invocation of her healthcare proxy. So a provider also has to sign saying that the healthcare proxy is now invoked. In other words, they determine that the person doesn't have capacity to make a decision, so therefore the healthcare proxy kicks in. It's called invoking the healthcare proxy. So, there's a lot of ways you can have it electronically now, and cloud and all that, but definitely the provider has to have a copy, definitely you should have a copy, and definitely your healthcare proxy should have a copy. Thanks, Al.
Shouldn't the hospital that in your area should have a copy as well?
Yeah, they usually scan it and put it in your record if you're in the hospital. And now they're trying to standardize, like the EMRs. They're trying to upload them directly from e-registries. Anybody else have an experience with that? I will tell you that in doing these talks, including visiting with my sister in Vermont and in our area, if somebody decides they do not want to be resuscitated and they have the form for it, and then they break their hip and they elect to have surgery to have it pinned, you may experience the hospital telling you that you have to reverse that for the period of time that you're in the hospital, because hospitals do not want people to die from hip surgery. They're very concerned about mortality statistics and things like that. So that's important to know that that might be requested of somebody if, but then you can execute a new one. So if you change your mind about anything, which you absolutely have the right to do, it just has to be dated more recently. Any other questions or experience with any of that? No? Okay, so palliative care, which is very hard to understand. Even the word is hard to understand. When my sister was going to do her fellowship in palliative care in New York City, I was taking care of my mom at that point, and my mom looked up at me and said, "What's that thing Patty's doing?" She was a nurse, and she was obviously very educated, but palliative care is just very hard to understand, and I'll tell you why. First of all, it started in Canada in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was associated with cancer units. So it was the recognition at the time that people that are dealing with cancer are dealing with it on a physical, emotional, social, financial, and often spiritual level. That cancer is a very difficult disease, and it takes a team to take care of people. And then the other part of it was that symptoms are, people that have cancer often have symptoms, sometimes pain, sometimes anxiety, understandable, constipation, other things. So it was proposing to have a team of people help you while you're going through cancer treatment with symptom management and also emotional dealing with it also. So it might seem like that's sort of a no-brainer, but the truth of the matter is, back then, they didn't even tell people when they had cancer sometimes. Doctors made a lot of the decisions. Things have changed a lot, which is a really good thing, but that's how it all started. So now, palliative care is still associated with cancer a lot of times, and the most common way to get palliative care consults is actually if you're hospitalized. So throughout the country, there are palliative care doctors, nurses, and mostly palliative care doctors and nurses that get special training to become a palliative care doctor. And it is a provider model, which means that it's just like if you were going to go see a cardiologist, if you were going to go see a neurologist, the palliative doctor is somebody that you would see a specialist when you're at a point in your disease when you have a lot of questions about what should I do? Should I fill out those forms or not? And also I have a symptom, I have heart disease, and I'm sick and tired of being tired and can't breathe. So palliative consults are often done to help people with symptoms and also with dealing with the disease and helping them to figure out what they want to do. They focus very much on quality of life. They have really good communication skills. And unfortunately right now it's a provider model. So it's not a team approach. And in the hospital a lot of times they will have a social worker, but the billing for palliative care, it's not really a team like hospice is. So it's paid under Medicare B, or if you have a Medicare Advantage program, it's paid under your specialist benefit. So it's more of a fee for service for this consult service. But, you know, they're very, very helpful. It's just not the way it was originally intended. And my sister, before she signed on to hospice, she had a palliative care nurse practitioner come to visit her home every 6 months. And partly because I wanted the caregiver's education around not forcing her to eat, you know, eating for enjoyment. And also because I wanted somebody else besides me to say, it looks like she's eligible, you know, for hospice now. But they have outpatient palliative care. In fact, a lot of main general settings do have outpatient palliative care. So this is my request to you, you know, find out where you can get palliative care, find out if insurance pays for it. The other thing is because there's no palliative care benefit in our country, there's no standard for palliative care. So a program can say they're a palliative care program without having a board certified palliative care doctor, or without having a social worker as part of the program, or not having a chaplain as part of the program. So there's no standard that says that a program has to have X, Y, or Z. So that's the difficulty with palliative care, but it is an incredible benefit. I think that they should have palliative care providers in every emergency room, in every skilled nursing facility or nursing home, because I see overtreatment all the time. I see people that are undergoing things that are recommended to them so people can cover themselves legally. And so if the treatment is like not going to make you better and it's not going to make you happy and you're not going to do anything with the information, then there's not really necessarily a point to do it unless you really want the knowledge. And I support that. I support anything anybody wants to do. Medical aid in dying, voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, whatever anybody chooses, I support. But I just want people to have the information so they can make a decision about what they want. So, so palliative care is hard because there's no benefit for it. There's no necessarily standards for it. Some of the palliative care program, like where I went with my sister in Vermont, they only had outpatient consults if you had cancer or ALS. A program near where I live, they only restrict it to if you have a doctor that's in the Bay State Medical Center system, and they only go within their geographic area. So there are limits to whether they're outpatient consults, whether you have to be in the hospital, and whether geographically, I'm sure there are some programs that limit by insurance, sadly to say, but just do some homework and find out where can you get palliative care before you need it, and ask for it, because I'm trying to create a demand for palliative care because it's a really good service, and I see a lot of suffering unnecessarily, especially with people with dementia. And I'll give an example of that on a very small level. So my sister, I told you, has advanced dementia, and she's a retired Navy nurse. And so she has the VA coming out to take care of her. She has a team, mostly the nurse. And they called me up and they said, your sister's heart rate's a little low. We're going to get a PO2 monitor, which is the thing you put on your finger and it registers your heart rate and your oxygen level. And they said, and we're going to get some Insure for her. So, I mean, you would think, you know, okay, fine. But then I had a conversation with my sister, who's the doctor, and we're co-healthcare proxies, and we were just talking about it. So my sister had a lot of agitation. It took me 4 providers to get someone to order the medication grouping that I knew she needed to have her be calmer. But she was biting, kicking, screaming, caregivers. It was really, really terrible. And now she's finally calm. And we're going to, you know, try to get her to stay still. She actually walks around a lot and taps things. We're going to get her to stay still so we can put this thing on her finger, which she's not going to like, so we can measure her heart rate and oxygen level that we're not going to do anything about. And then the same thing with Insure. The reason why she did as well as she did for so long, because she loves Entenmann donuts and she loves McDonald's milkshakes. So she wasn't losing weight. So just give her a milkshake. You know, so you know what, you're often in the situation, most people that I know, even my mother would say, do I need to still take all these vitamins? And why are vitamins so big? They're impossible to swallow and you break them in half and they're worse. So most people go from a regular diet to a soft diet, to a ground diet, to a parade diet, to sips and bites, to not eating. And so when she was in a nursing home. They wanted to do a swallowing evaluation, which is done by speech therapist. Anytime they change someone's diet, they send out a speech therapist to evaluate the mechanisms of swallowing, determine whether in fact they need to be on either one of these kind of diets. And so my mother was on a soft diet, so she could have like tuna fish sandwiches or egg salad sandwiches or, soft things. And she made it clear to us that she did not want to have a ground diet or a parade diet. She actually called it schlop. I'm not going to eat that schlop. So my sister's on the phone with the nurse, bless you. My sister's on the phone with the nurse practitioner, like arguing. I mean, she's a palliative care doctor, saying we're not going to have a swallowing eval because she's not going to have that diet, and we'll sign anything you want us to sign to take the risk of having, to not changing the diet. So you just have a lot more rights than I think that sometimes people realize, that you have the right to say or have what you really want to have. But it's not easy. It's not easy to, to speak up. Even like I said, my sister, who's a doctor, had a hard time convincing them that, no, that's not. And so that's why I never say someone refuses. I say they decline, because they have the right to decline. I don't say someone complains. I said they report. So I think, words matter. And I think that, people need to start looking at people's situation like that. And, with my sister, I think of her as the oldest of a large Irish family, Navy nurse, moved away to Texas. I never really remember living with her that much because she was the oldest. And, caregivers often look at her in terms of, did she have breakfast? Is today the day she has a shower? They look in terms of activities of daily living. And I think healthcare people need to start looking people in deeper in terms of who they are. Because, I find people fascinating, and everybody is very unique. And I think that if people start looking people about who they are, it'll be easy to determine what it is they want and offer people choices about what they want. So anyway, there's a chapter in my book called Does Palliative Care Mean Mom is Dying? And it's a woman I took care of. Her name is Dottie. And she was in the hospital 6 times in 9 months for congestive heart failure. So when you have congestive heart failure, you have a weakened heart, which causes fluid to go into places that they shouldn't, like the lungs and the feet and the hands and the middle part here. And so she would go to the hospital and they'd clinically get her better. And then she was frail, so she'd go to a rehab setting and she'd get therapy and hopefully she'd get stronger. And then she'd come back home again on the VNA program where I was. And on the palliative, so we ended up having her go on the palliative care program. But just keep in mind, all of those steps, you don't see your doctor or provider. You see a hospitalist in the hospital, you see a nurse practitioner at the nursing home, and then back home you don't see a provider. So please have your medicine list with you all the time, or have access to your medication list, because the chance of your ending up on the right medication from the time you go from home to the hospital to the rehab setting and back home again is almost nil. Especially if they're changing cardiac meds or doses, or you don't get on your right bowel medicines, or you don't get on your right sleeping medicines, or the Tylenol gets forgotten about, whatever. When you're in a setting like that, it's not flexible at all. So just make sure that you have your medicine list with you when you do that. So with Dottie, what happened was she was living with one daughter, and her healthcare proxy daughter lived nearby. And she was like this big, and every time she said anything, it was like this. Everything was a proclamation, and she was fierce. She really was. And you know what? She wasn't even eligible for hospice. Even though the doctor was so frustrated, he called her office and said, I want her on hospice. No one ever talked to her about it, and she wasn't even eligible. He was just frustrated because, unfortunately, with a lot of diseases, it's just reacting. So what we did, we ended up setting up a protocol for her difficulty breathing. She wouldn't take her water pill because she didn't want to pee too much if she had to go anywhere, and that's what happened. Or she didn't get it refilled, and then she'd get behind on her water pill, and she'd end up in the hospital. So we just watched her really closely. We watched her weight really closely. We watched her blood pressure and pulse really closely and her oxygen level. We set up a plan for managing her difficulty breathing. If you have a hard time breathing, stop, sit down, put on your oxygen. We had medicine available. Call your daughter, call your doctor. And so she didn't go back to the hospital actually after that. So it takes not reacting to everything all the time. We know people with COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and CHF, congestive heart failure, are going to be at risk for difficulty breathing. We know that people that have dementia are going to be at risk for aspiration pneumonia. There's ways of recognizing triggers and minimizing them. So anyway, palliative care helps with all of that. And so I encourage you to consider reaching out and finding out a little bit more in your community about palliative care. Has anybody had experience with palliative care, either a consult or anything? Yeah? Hopefully it was positive.
Well, not for me personally.
Oh, that's
but
too bad.
For my wife.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Years ago. And she was she had dying from melanoma,
Oh,
and I think it was for the last 8 days or so, when there was no more treatment available. The palliative care team came into the hospital, and they're actually really wonderful people. And actually, worked with her was Dr. Ira Byock.
oh yes.
And worked with her for actually a couple of days. So
Wow.
Yeah.
He's like a leader
yeah,
in the country.
yeah, we were
Wow.
lucky.
Yeah.
Lucky, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I really recommend if you're in a crossroads of your care, you have a serious illness, you're not sure what to do, you're not sure what to put on the forms for procedures, to access a palliative care consult. They really do lead with their heart and try really hard to match the care that you want with the right care. And you know what it's like if you have a cardiac med, the cardiologist is the one that prescribes that, but somebody else is prescribing something else. They really look at your whole self and who you are and what what's helpful for you. But they don't tell you what's helpful for you. They ask you what's helpful for you. So I really recommend people accessing palliative care if they need it. So the last thing I was going to talk about is hospice care. And so hospice is, the difference between palliative care and hospice is that palliative care, people are still generally getting active treatment, because it used to be when people were getting cancer. Now it's usually people that are still in the hospital getting active treatment, and they're not necessarily in the last 6 months of life. So hospice is for people who are 2 doctors certified that in all likelihood their prognosis in the last 6 months, and they're choosing comfort measures only. So they're not getting hospitalization, chemotherapy, radiation. They're basically just letting the disease go until they pass. And hospice usually covers for 4 things. It covers for a team of people. It covers durable medical equipment. It covers supplies like toileting supplies, ostomy supplies, bandage supplies if you need it, and then medication. And so the hospice team just walks the walk with people and adds whatever is needed to help them be comfortable. And because the hospice team is used to this process, we sort of anticipate the kinds of things that people need. So, for example, when people are admitted, a comfort kit with 6 medications are put in people's home, and the purpose of that is if you call at 3 o'clock in the morning and say that your loved one is sick to their stomach, we can say, go into the comfort kit and get this particular medicine. So we don't have to get a doctor, a pharmacist, one that's open. So most hospices provide what's called a comfort kit. And we also anticipate that people are going to sleep more, eat less, move around less, and talk less. So, we try very hard to keep people safe, knowing that eventually somebody might need a commode. So we kind of anticipate things so that people are safe and comfortable. So I'm just going to read a little bit from another chapter. This is George. George is a farmer, and he had Parkinson's disease. And these are all people I took care of, but I changed the story enough to not have it be obvious. Or to keep it confidential. And this is, the title of this chapter is called The Agony of Waiting for Dad to Die. One of George's earliest memories is sitting on his father's lap while he drove the tractor around the farm. Up there, he could see everything, the cows, the rows of corn, the chicken coop, and the barn. Now he finds himself flooded with memories of his parents, all the adventures with his siblings on the farm, 4-H club, and showing cows at the fair. He also remembers all the emergencies, like when his brother cut his fingers on the rototiller, the time the coyotes got into the chicken coop, and of course, the fire in the barn. As he sits in his chair on the front porch, George's mind wanders over these memories as if he needs to touch them all over again in this new state of dying in order to make sense of them all. Occasionally, he'll share a memory with Shirley, his wife of 62 years, but mostly it's his own private journey. So people naturally look back at their life and, you know, sometimes they try to reconcile relationships. They try to put experiences into some sense of order, understanding. They're sleeping more, so I think they're also dreaming sometimes. And there's a lot of sort of referring back to when they were young. And they talk a lot about their parents. And so a lot of social workers with hospice and bereavement people help with that process and actually help facilitate a life review. And for when there's young children or grandchildren involved, they also help with creating memory books and things like that to actually help people to remember their loved ones. So it's a sort of normal process that happens. And, you know, a lot of times where I practice is a veterans home. And so for a lot of veterans, there's a lot of sometimes difficulty with sort of reconciling service work versus civilian work and things that may have happened. In the early days of my practice, it was a lot of World War II veterans, which are not at all socialized to talk about either what they did or how they felt about it. They talked about the camaraderie and they talked about the machinery. And so and sometimes people do revisit that. There's a chapter in my book called Soothing the Soul, and it was a story about a veteran I took care of who ended up having a lot of restlessness at end of life and how much a pastoral or religious visit really helped him. He received reconciliation and he also received a sacrament of the sick, and it really helped him a lot, I think. At that point, he wasn't even responsive, and the medication we had given him was not, he still seemed tense, and it was like a magic wand. So I think that people try very hard to seek peace, whether it means connecting with people, being back home, being clean, whatever it is, people do try, I think, to get to a place of some level of peace with relationships or higher power or whatever. And so the hospice team helps sometimes with that. I'm just going to read another piece from this particular chapter. The two other things that I find really people have a really struggle with is when people don't eat anymore. It's really, really hard. Culturally, it's hard. To feed people is to nurture them. And the other part is to actually be at the bedside when someone's in the final days of life without just wanting it over. And so I'm just going to read a little bit about George again. And this is, his wife's name is Shirley. Later that afternoon, while George is sleeping, Shirley is in the kitchen listening to the television while she peels and cuts up vegetables for dinner. She hears her daughter Kim come through the front door and sees her two grandchildren running out back in the yard. "Hi, Grammy," they both yell as Shirley waves and smiles to them from the kitchen window. Kim comes in and kisses her mom on the cheek while she's still at the sink peeling carrots. "Where's Dad?" she asked. "He's taking a nap," Shirley tells her. "He's been awfully tired today." "Well, how long has he been sleeping? Don't you think you should wake him? He won't sleep tonight if he keeps on sleeping. Did he eat breakfast and lunch okay?" Shirley grabs the dish towel hanging on the oven handle and dries her hands. She feels the weight of all these decisions around how much to push George and how much to let go. She wipes the back of her hand on her forehead and says to Kim, "I'll get him up in a bit, just as soon as I finish here." Shirley knows that if George doesn't eat, he will continue to get weaker and weaker. She is often in the position of having to answer to people about how he's doing and how he's eating. It's exhausting and wearisome. And then the last thing I'll read is the hospice nurse in my stories are named Charlene. And so Charlene comes out to visit both of them. She says, "How are things going?" Charlene asks, looking back and forth between George and Shirley. "Well, George's appetite has gone down quite a bit in the past week, and he's sleeping a lot more," Shirley begins. "He also seems more confused," she adds, lowering her voice to a whisper. Charlene turns to George. "George, are you feeling sick to your stomach, or do you just not have much of an appetite?" In response, he points his finger, implying the latter. "Not hungry." "That's okay." Shirley jumps in. "Some of my family and George's family keep pushing him to eat." She reaches over to hold George's hand. "I feel like he's slipping away," she says, her voice cracking as she reaches into her pants pocket, takes out a tissue and wipes tears from her eyes. Charlene reaches over and takes her hand now. "It's so hard for everyone. Eating is such a family event. To feed people is to nurture them." She goes on to tell them that when people are really sick, they don't feel like eating. It's really hard for families to adjust to this because everyone knows what happens when people don't don't eat. It's normal, though, when people are at the final stage of life. It's also normal for families to feel sad and worried about it. So it is really hard, but I will tell you that very recently, 2 of the people that I've cared for actually ended up aspirating. They ended up going down the wrong pipe, and then it became like a pneumonia situation, and it was extra challenging. So, food should be for enjoyment and not, because everybody should eat at certain times or whatever, but it is very hard. And again, a lot of the team members can help with that. It's really difficult. The other thing is being with people in the end of life. Some of the most touching and memorable times that I've had with my mom in the time I was taking care of her were the times when we had really heart-to-heart conversations. So I was sitting with her on Mother's Day, the Mother's Day before she died, and I said we were just talking, and I'm a mother myself, so I said, Mom, what's been the hardest part about being a mom? And so she said, my brother died at age 53. That was what she carried with her for the rest of her life, which was terrible. And then she said raising kids during the 60s was very, very difficult. And then we had just had a patient at our hospice that had chose to die after being in hospice by voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. And I said to her, Mom, would you ever consider doing that? And she said, I'll go when the good Lord takes me. So, I look back in that conversation, and another one a month before she died. So what I want to just say about having conversation, approaching conversations, it's not easy. I come from a medical family, and so it may be a little bit easier. I find it easier if you ask about somebody else. Mom, how did your sister Betty die? Was she at home? Was she in the hospital? What did she have? If you talk about somebody else, it kind of takes the focus off, and then it's easier to say, would you ever want that? Or what do you want? So that makes it a little bit easier. But the part about being at the bedside, presence is really valuable. I think people have a hard time because this might sound a little Pollyanna-ish, but I think people are still who they've always been. And I know that the end-of-life process means that people move around less, they sleep more, they eat less, and they talk less. But, they're still very much who they are. Just like I mentioned with my sister, I still see my sister as the oldest and, the nurse and the Navy veteran. And so I just encourage people to be willing to sit with somebody. And I know that people change the color, and I know their color gets gray, and I know that it's very difficult. The pain of saying goodbye to somebody is incredibly difficult. But I am used to the end-of-life process, having been with people so much that I don't necessarily consider it suffering. The suffering that I experience is when I walked in to see somebody because the daughter refused to allow her to have an opioid because she has an opioid trauma history, and she's panting so hard that she can't breathe. That's what I consider to be suffering, is when people have symptoms that interfere with their quality of life. But, I think I'm not negating how difficult it is. But about a month before my mom died, I didn't know it was a month before, but I went to visit with her, and she was very sleepy. And I took her outside, and I asked her a couple times, Mom, why are you so sleepy? And the staff said, she hasn't had anything. I think she slept all right. So then I said, Mom, what's going on? Why are you so sleepy? And she said, well, I'm going to die today. And I said, really? Are you okay with that? She didn't answer it. And then I asked her, Mom, have you had sacrament of the sick? And she said, I don't know, Rini, check my record, which I thought was very funny as a nurse, right? I had to laugh. But then I looked at her hand that was on the table, and I was thinking to myself, all the, like a mother's hands, all the wiping and holding, and, and I took a picture of it, actually, because I was just so struck by looking at my mom's hand. And then, so that's kind of the way they feel, at the end of life, that they're going through a process. I have no idea what it is. It's up to their process. It's their beliefs about where they're going. I'm there to help them be clean, calm, and comfortable. And I encourage family members to sit with people in there, because soon you're not going to see them in real life anymore. So if it's, I know everybody's busy and everybody, so I just encourage people to think about what is suffering and what is the natural process of dying if you don't die from a traumatic situation, and to be willing to sit with people and to try to push through the discomfort and have the conversations with people about, what would you want, or How do you want this to go? We ask family members all the time when we admit people. We say, what are your goals, or how do you want this to go? What's important to you at this point? And most people say, I want to be home, I want to be comfortable, and I want to have a peaceful death, and I want my family to be okay. So that's what we mostly hear. The most common thing we're asked is, how long do you think they have to live? And people in hospice refer to actively dying and imminently dying. And actively dying is the final days to weeks of life, and imminently dying is the final hours to days of life. And so it's helpful to tell families what we see and what we think so that they can call people, or they can make arrangements for religious blessings or whatever. But I just think it's important to try to have some conversations, because now I look back on them and they're the most cherished conversations I've had. And then you're not, in a place of not knowing what somebody wanted. So that's what I've encouraged. So for hospice, it's covered, it switches. If you have a Medicare Advantage program, it switches to straight Medicare, and it's covered 100% on a Medicare A. And it doesn't cover for everything, but what it does cover, it's 100% paid for. And I encourage people, there's a terrible direction going on in our country in hospice. 84% of the hospices are for-profit. Many of them are connected to nursing homes, and many of them are owned by private equity. So my advice to you all is to do your homework, find out where you can get hospice. If you're affiliated with a for-profit hospice that take good care of you, then, great. But I don't personally want anybody to profit off of the death or illness of my loved one. There are 16 hospices in Maine. 2 of them just merged, so there's actually 16. And out of that, 7 are not-for-profit and 9 are for-profit. So here's a not uncommon scenario. You go to a rehab setting because you want to give the exercise a try. They'll tell you in a nanosecond that you're stabilizing and not progressing, that you've plateaued. And at that particular point, they might say, do you want to talk to someone from hospice? Just know at that particular moment that you have a right to choose who you want to take care of you. So I hope that you look into palliative care, look into hospice, look into these advanced directives and healthcare proxies, so that, long before you need it, so that you're informed and you're talking about it, because I honestly, truly believe that the experience will go better. Just one more thing I wanted to say, that the hospice team is really wonderful. They have nurses, they have social workers, they have spiritual counselors, which used to be called chaplains, but because it was had too much Christian part of it, spiritual counselors are more neutral. Then they have home health aides. They have phenomenal volunteers that do Reiki, energy work, pet therapy, music therapy. It's phenomenal. And then there's bereavement. Bereavement is required for 12 months after your loved one dies. And the volunteers are wonderful. So if something's important to you, like, does your hospice have pet therapy, or does your hospice speak my language? So that's another question you might want to look into. If you go to medicare.gov, compare hospice, actually my website again, maureengroden.com, has the website address for Hospice Compare, and you can actually see the star ratings. They ask questions like, did they visit you in the last 7 days of life? Was the on-call service prompt? There's a lot of really good, so look at the star ratings of the hospices and kind of figure out that if I ever need it or my loved one needs it, I think I'll plan to choose this one, because I think that's important. So one of the most amazing parts of hospice, and everybody says it's the heart of hospice, is the volunteers. So I want the people that are bedside singers from Solace who joined today to consider coming, doing a little music for us. Would that be okay? Thank you. Do you want to come up here, or can they be, what would you prefer, either one? Okay, you can do whatever, yeah. Did you want to have a mic? Or no? And if you have anything else you want to add, because you're a wealth of experience between all of you, please feel free to jump in, okay?
We'll just sing one song for you that we usually close with.
That blessing hung on the wall in our house our entire life.
I'm sorry, what did you just say?
I said that blessing, the Irish blessing, hung on the wall at the entrance to our house our entire life growing up
Oh, wow.
in our family. Yeah,
Wow.
it was my father's favorite.
I just wanted to tell you about my experience with my mother dying, which was 31 years ago. And she had cancer and decided at that point not to go through treatment, which was her choice. And she was very active and very feisty, and we kind of had a contentious relationship. But in her last days, for like the last week, she was in a nursing home and she stayed in her bed and she stopped eating. And so my sisters and I were all keeping watch. So the last night, I didn't know it was going to be her last night. I was there with her. And by that time, she wasn't even talking. It just, you could see it would take too much energy for her to do that. So I took her hand and I just stayed there. And something told me to tell her, you know, we're all going to be okay, Mom. And Dad's waiting for you. And I felt her go. So I just feel so privileged to have been the one there, you know, especially since our relationship was feisty. And it was just, I mean, it was one of the most privileged experiences of my life, except for when my two kids were born. So, so thank you, because I could relate to so much of what you were saying. Thank you.
It is a really privilege. I mean, I feel like it's been the privilege of my personal and professional life. Here we go. I'll tell you about what happened when my mom actually died. She was living in that, it was an old Victorian house. It was a nursing home. They took really good care of her. So, one day she had a respiratory bug, and one day she would look really sedated, and we thought, she's not going to get over this. And then the next day she'd ask for a coffee milkshake, and we thought, she's going to get over this. And that's what it went for a while. And then it became clear that she was not going to get over it. And then in the last day of her life, Ellie, my sister, and I, and my other sister that I referred to, Patty, were all taking care of her. And she was breathing really, really heavily. So, one of the chapters in my book is called Morphine Doesn't Kill People, Diseases Do. Morphine's in the same category as Percocet and Vicodin and all the rest of them. There's nothing about it that makes it, any worse necessarily. It's incredibly helpful. When you're on all the other medicine and you're still symptomatic, it's the humane thing to do. It makes the brain speak a different language from the body. So instead of breathing 50 times a minute, she just breathed easily. And finally, she was quiet, and on a mantelpiece was a picture of my dad and a picture of my brother. And same thing, it's the exact same thing. We said, Mom, you've been a wonderful mom. It's okay. You can go. We're going to be okay. And then I told her, I said, we're going to see you in every sunset. We're going to see you in every rainbow. And we're going to see you whenever we look out over the ocean. And she died. But listen to this. What happened was we packed up her belongings and said goodbye and thank you to everybody. We called the family. And then we went back to the homestead. And this is like between 6 and 8 in the morning. Over the homestead was this big rainbow. So that's just a amazing memory. So this is why I try so hard when people are at the end of their life to have the experience be a positive one as much as possible, and to educate people about what typically happens. So they like leaving the bedside. People are like in angst. I was there the whole time and then I left and she died. It happens all the time. I don't know why it happens, but just to know that it happens a lot might make it, okay a little bit more. So I let people know what happens so that people will have a good experience, because these experiences are indelible, and and it stays with people for the rest of their lives. So anyway, I'm hoping that's the case for you. So thank you so much for coming. If anybody wants a book, I do have copies of it. You're welcome to buy it. If you're not in the position to do that, please take a butterscotch. I also have a code from my publisher, Johns Hopkins, so if you want to just buy it later, you can do that. There's a 30% off discount. So thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.